Hey, I'm Sam. Welcome to Brickwall Pictures. Florian Zeller has directed 2 films thus far, The Father and The Son, but don't mistake him for some new up-and-coming filmmaker. He's been around for a long time as an author and a playwright. In fact, both of his films thus far have been adapted from his own plays. I saw The Father right when it came out and was blown away. It was in my top 5 for the year, and I found it to be an all-around excellent piece of work. My rule for directors is to avoid forming any sort of overall judgment on them until I've seen at least 2, if not 3 of their movies. And let me tell you, that rule was well placed in Florian Zeller's case. After loving The Father so much, I was unsurprisingly excited for Zeller's next film, The Son, which doesn't share any characters or plot points, but is still something of a spiritual sequel in a dramatic and thematic sense. I just watched The Son a couple days ago, and oh man, woof. I did not enjoy it. While The Father was one of my top films of the year, The Son is tied for my lowest rated film of 2022 at this point. So what happened? How does the same writer-director adapting his own source material twice in a row culminate in 2 pieces of work at opposite ends of the quality spectrum? Unlike a lot of critics, I don't enjoy being overly negative. I prefer to sing the praises of films I love rather than tear down the ones that I don't. But this is too interesting of a case study to ignore. And the way I'm going to counteract that is, rather than just breaking down why The Son is a bit of a failure, I'm going to also take this opportunity to explore why The Father works so well at the same time. And given that The Son is still relatively new, I will avoid spoilers, even though the ending is one of the biggest issues with it. I won't spoil The Father either, so if you haven't seen one or both of them, don't worry. The Father is a chamber drama about an elderly man's battle with dementia and his struggle to maintain control and order in his life. The Son is about a man's struggle to parent a teenager with adolescent depression. Both films are heavy dramas that tackle mental health subject matter, and they make for appropriate companion pieces to one another. Except Zeller's writing and directing are at such drastically different calibers for each film. Notice how I said The Father is about a character experience a mental health struggle, while The Son isn't. Contrary to what you might have been led to believe and might assume, The Son is not a film about a teenager's battle with depression. It's about that teenager's father dealing with his son's depression. That distinction could sound minor, but the perspective shift there makes a world of difference. The Father is thoroughly grounded in the point of view of its main character. The audience is invited into his mind, and Zeller's remarkable directorial choices replicate the sensations of dementia by disorienting the viewer alongside the character. Actors swap out to play the same role, time contracts in loops in unpredictable ways, and creative editing choices keep the character and the audience off balance for almost the entire duration of the film. All of these directorial flourishes are flashy and impressive, sure, but they're also substantive, and they create such a strong sense of perspective for this deeply personal drama that's unfolding. Of course, The Son can't just employ the same bag of tricks, but it also makes no attempt to visualize or simulate as a burden of depression in the way that Zeller had previously tackled dementia. There's no attempt to place the audience in the son's point of view, nor are viewers even invited to understand or empathize with his struggle. This troubled teen is the center of the film's drama, but he isn't the main character, with the film instead being told from his father's point of view. To put it simply, The Father creates a compelling, distinctive, character-based experience for the viewer through its creative choices, whereas The Son just doesn't. This stylistic change on its own could be fine as long as the father character's perspective felt realized and compelling, and as long as the depiction of depression felt real and nuanced from this external vantage point. But the film drops the ball on both counts. A lot of these shortcomings stem from Zeller's script, but the performances need to share some of the burden, unfortunately. The 2021 Best Lead Performance Oscar race was pretty tight that year. I would have been happy with Riz Ahmed winning for The Sound of Metal, but Sir Anthony Hopkins winning was a totally worthy pick for The Father.
I hope she'll come and see me sometime. Do you think, Mommy? He was saying she might come occasionally at the weekend.
Your daughter?
No. Mommy. I want my mommy. I want my mommy. I want to get out of here. Have someone come and fetch me.
No, shh.
He really does deliver what I consider to be perhaps the best performance of his career, in a career filled with many great performances, of course. He taps into a vulnerability that he hasn't been afforded the runway to express in many years. And he portrays the heartbreaking nature of dementia in a wholly believable way, alongside all the other far-ranging moods and emotions that entails. You also had great supporting performances from Olivia Colman, Olivia Williams, Imogen Poots, Mark Gatiss, and Rufus Sewell to round out the cast. In The Son, the adult cast consists of Hugh Jackman, Laura Dern, and Vanessa Kirby, while the teenager at the heart of the drama is played by Zen McGrath in his first starring role. I'm sorry to say that he does not come out of this thing looking good. He's serviceable in some scenes, but whenever he has to yell or cry, which is frequently, he simply doesn't deliver the caliber of performance necessary to carry the film. This portrayal of depression isn't believable in the slightest, and the fault for that can be pretty evenly divided between McGrath's performance and Zeller's writing. I don't want to put too much blame on McGrath himself, though. He's young and it's a tough role, and it's really on Zeller to be able to know that his star isn't up to the challenge when he's casting the thing. I also think it's safe to place the majority of the blame on Zeller because the other performances are weak too, which is always a telltale sign that the fault lies with the director more than the actual cast. Vanessa Kirby does a fine job, and actually Anthony Hopkins again shines in his single scene appearance, but Hugh Jackman and Laura Dern are both extremely far from being at their best. The Son makes the two of them look like much worse actors than they actually are. They've both been great in plenty of other projects, but Dern and especially Jackman just seem lost and out of their depth in these roles. I was surprised to learn that this was an important role to Jackman, and that he even went out of his way to pursue the film and send Zeller a letter asking for the part, which isn't something he's in a habit of doing. The actors are not aided by the fact that the bulk of the dialogue in The Son sounds completely stilted and unnatural.
It's Nicholas.
Did something happen?
Yes.
Well, tell me.
This afternoon, they called me in the school just now to speak to the principal so he could explain to me what was going on. And that's when I found out. Nicholas hasn't been to school in almost a month.
What?
I'm telling you, for weeks now, he's just been pretending
Sorry,
every
what are you
morning.
talking about?
I'm explaining it to you.
Back up a minute. He hasn't been to school in almost a month and you never noticed.
It's the kind of dialogue that might work perfectly well on the stage and or in French, Zeller's native language, but in the context of a feature film, it just sounds phony all the time. Jackman's other big pitfall here is his accent. He's Australian, of course, but he's given plenty of convincing American accents in movies before. But The Son is not one of those times. His accent is a mess. He's all over the place. He sounds relatively on target throughout the early stages of the film, but once the drama knob cranks up and he has to get emotional, he loses the accent entirely. He doesn't slip into Australian, but his American accent becomes cartoonish.
I called the school. I called them. And you know what they told me? They told me you'd never been back there. They told me you were there on the first day last month, and afterwards you never came back.
Any commitment to a specific regional accent just goes out the window. His fluctuating accent honestly made me laugh a couple of times in the back half of the film when he starts yelling and he starts out a line sounding like he's from New York and ends it sounding like he's from Texas. Zen McGrath is also Australian, and I'll say I think he actually did a much better job with his accent than Jackman. I didn't know he wasn't American while watching the movie. I found that out after. But it surely didn't help him that he was having to act in a phony accent while already struggling to meet the dramatic demands of the role. But forget about McGrath for a minute. Even with the best actor in the world in this part, it would be tough for anyone to make this character and his struggle with depression believable as it's written. This is such a surface level, uninformed portrayal of depression. It's hard to escape the sensation that Zeller lacks the perspective necessary to tell this story in an authentic manner. Now that's a little surprising, given that he has said repeatedly that this film is influenced by his experiences parenting a teen with depression. It makes sense that he would frame the story from the father's point of view, given that information. But neither character feels dimensional or even believable in their actions. Jackman's character is frustratingly out of touch for the entire film. And not in a way that feels based in character, it's in a way that feels emotionally untrue. But big picture, it isn't just the character that feels out of touch, it's the movie itself. If you read interviews with Zeller, you'll find that time and again he said that his goal with the film is to raise awareness about depression and mental health struggles in general. That's all well and good, but it would mean a whole lot more if the film had anything worthwhile to say about that subject matter. The film is content simply acknowledging that depression exists and is a serious matter. And it's like, yeah, we all know that. It's 2022. You're a little late with that message. Maybe 20 years ago, that would have been a worthwhile message that depression exists. But you're a little behind the times, son. Even the stage play version of The Son was performed for the first time in 2019, which is still long after depression has been tackled in far more effective ways by dozens of other films. It's too little and too late. It isn't enough to just go, boy, depression sure is tough, isn't it? Especially when your portrayal of depression is so cartoonishly shallow and inauthentic. This facile depiction of its themes wasn't an issue in The Father. Zeller's presentation of dementia felt remarkably authentic, empathetic, intimate, and lived in. It felt real, whereas nothing in The Son feels real in the slightest. What we're left with is a film that feels artificial at every turn, while insisting that it's so heavy and emotional and true. But it isn't. It's melodramatic and emotionally manipulative, and not even effectively so. I could spend another 5 minutes breaking down why the ending is manipulative BS, further muddies the themes, and is kind of a slap in the face to anyone who has actually experienced depression. But I said I would avoid spoilers, so let's not go down that road. Let's just say it's a little insensitive, maybe a little misguided. There are definitely ways to do what this film does effectively, and this movie said, I'm not going to take any of those approaches. I'm going to take the most blunt, straightforward, uncaring route possible. Zeller has another play called The Mother that completes a spiritual trilogy on the stage. He's gone back and forth on whether or not he'll adapt that one next for the big screen, or if at all. If he does, I will be curious to find out if it lands closer to The Father or The Son, because, yeah, I've never quite seen a filmmaker pendulum so far from one end of the spectrum to another with his first two movies. It's a pretty extreme gap in quality. In closing, I do still recommend checking out The Father. Instead of watching The Son, if you want a film that tackles depression and executes every conceivable element of the filmmaking process infinitely better, I recommend the South Korean film Peppermint Candy, which I have a review for that you can find here on the end screen or down in the description. Check that one out next. Until next time, so long. Oh, you thought I was going all the way out of frame, didn't you? I only went to here, and I came back up, and now I'm gone.